So obviously y'all are not here to stare at our beautiful faces. You're here for the special guest who is continuing the awesomeness of this show because we're bringing him in. He's one of our all-time favorite people. He hosts Broncos Country tonight on KOA and iHeartRadio with Benjamin Albright from 6 to 9 Mountain Standard Time. He is the reason behind all of the good thing that happens with the Denver Broncos and the city of Denver, as well as Albright's personal supplier of anything pumpkin spice. He's also Rob Walton's money man. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Edwards. How we doing, buddy?
I mean, there's absolutely no way I could live up to that intro, but thanks. I appreciate it. That's
I did everything I could to try to hype you up.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. No, I'm excited to be here. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks.
It's always great to have you on. Now, we've been talking about the preseason game we just had on Saturday. We were talking about Jonas Griffith. Is there anything else we've learned about Jonas Griffith's injury and when he might be back?
Yeah, I mean, what I've understood is the Broncos are being cautiously optimistic would probably be a good way to frame it. Week one doesn't feel that likely to me, but I think that they're sort of waiting a little bit to see how he responds to treatments, and then they'll kind of go from there. For me, this is more of like a week two conversation, maybe a week three conversation. And we've seen with this coaching staff, they take everything slow. They have no problem going with the extra care involved to make sure a guy is completely right. So for me, again, this won't be one of those things where they're going to force him back in there. It doesn't even matter if they really need him or not. They're going to take their time. And I think that's probably the right call.
Ryan, in your opinion, how different was training camp this year versus previous seasons?
You know, it's a good question, and we sort of talked about it on Broncos Country tonight. I thought it was one of the better ones I've ever been to be honest. And you know, maybe it's the music, maybe it's the vibe. Everybody seems to be in a pretty good mood. Russell Wilson's here. Maybe it's Coach Hackett. I mean, it could be a lot of different reasons, right? But I don't really know what it is specifically to put my finger on, other than to say when I've been in training camps, we get to about day 8 or 9. 10, and I'm usually like, man, I'm done. I'm good. You know, it's hot. I'm ready for a game. I'm ready for anything else besides training camp. But this year, I don't know, man. We got to day 11, day 12, and I was kind of like, man, this is fun. The guys are having a good time. It's been fun getting these interviews. Everybody wants to talk about the team. Like I historically, it is a little bit of a mixed bag, right? I mean, you bring in guys and, you know, you bring them onto the show and they know, right? They know what they're going to be probably. They want to talk positively, but there's an understanding. Hey, we don't, you know, we have a great quarterback situation. Who knows what's going to happen this year? But this year, I mean, you got Russell Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett's got this really fun vibe where they're competing in all these different Pop-A-Shot games and all the stuff in the background. So, like I said, this year was a lot of fun. This was one of my more fun training camps I've ever been. It's my 13th year, so I feel like I've got a little bit of a beat on when things are good and when things really aren't.
You know, Ryan, I got to ask you, obviously, for the Tim Patrick injury, it's a significant blow for that wide receiver room. However, you know, in the case of, you know, maybe even a case of bringing a wide receiver in that's, you know, off of another team or even a veteran wide receiver, that first preseason game that we saw sort of kind of put to bed all sort of rumors really of the Broncos really even bringing anyone in because of the way that the wide receiving group even performed. And we saw a wide receiver, Travis Fulgham, you know, get released today. But really the wide receiver room just as a whole just really shined bright. Anybody, you know, you name it, really performed quite well. Brandon Johnson, Jalen Virgil, you know, Kendall Hinton, Seth Williams, Hall of Fame quarterback, right? Wide receiver Kendall Hinton did quite well. So, I mean, how exactly do you see that wide receiver room shaking out? Is it conceivable that the Broncos don't just carry 6 wide receivers, but they actually carry 7 wide receivers?
Yeah, I'd say it's a strong possibility, right? I mean, you see the way they performed, and those opportunities are only going to increase now that you've thinned out a couple of wide receivers in the room, right? No Caden Davis. He was obviously released. Travis Fulgham was released. So you think that the opportunities, Trey Quinn, this is it. You know, that you sort of like, if you're going to get a chance to make this roster, even the practice squad, you got to make a run here. The Buffalo game, you got the Minnesota game. These are your opportunities. But 100%, I mean, you think Montrell Washington, if you just pencil him in at number 5, right? Number 4 is right now Kendall Hinton. So number 5 would be Montrell. And then you'd say 6 and 7 are kind of up for debate. I think Jalen Virgil has certainly showed quite a bit there. He's had some big plays in training camp. Some of the biggest receptions that we've seen out there have come from Jalen Virgil. So I sort of think that he has a good spot. I think Brandon Johnson's been the guy that's been running with the ones the most of that group. And so, even today when we were watching practice, Brandon Johnson's out there running when they go 3 wide because, again, KJ Hamler's not available right now. But Kendall Hinton, again, is mixed in there as well. I mean, he's getting plenty of opportunities. So for me, I put Brandon Johnson in that conversation. You talk about Seth Williams, who's a second-year player. He's made some nice contested catches, had a little inconsistent during training camp, but I think that if he shows up big in the games, they have to consider that. Don't forget about Tyree Cleveland either, who Dwayne Stoops called a core special teamer. So, again, you kind of throw in the mix of all those guys, and certainly I think getting to 7 is probably the number because they have to also play special teams. But it seems to me, as long as they feel like they're getting value on special teams and they can maybe mix some of these guys in as receiver, and they also have to understand who could potentially sneak onto practice squad. That's going to be a bit of a factor in this as well. I mean, again, if these guys keep playing like they are, that's going to be a difficult conversation too. So again, long kind of winded answer here. I think that it's a really intriguing competition that I think over the next 2 preseason games, we're going to learn more about.
Ryan, as a pumpkin spice latte enthusiast, who are your top 3 Broncos to watch in the next game?
Man, you're always going to get a good answer out of me with that. Top 3 Broncos to watch. Well, I mean, let's start with Baron Browning, right? I mean, he's going to continue to play. He wants to play. So Baron Browning, can he continue to dominate? And one of the things we see oftentimes, and we sort of put out there is, okay, is a guy looks talented. Is he dominating when he's going up against his matchups, especially if he's going up against 2s and 3s? You remember when Jerry Jeudy was drafted first overall, or in the first round for the Broncos, and that very next training camp, just blowing everybody away. He was playing on the second team, and he was shredding everybody. Had just tremendous upside, and that's what he should be doing, right? Well, Baron Browning's been looking like that out of training camp. He's gotten a few opportunities there with the 1s. But most of the time he's been working with the 2s, him and Nick Bonito opposite each other. So they should win those matchups. And that's what we got a chance to see. So I want to see more Baron Browning. I want to see more Montrell Washington. I sort of feel like his skill set, especially as they're working KJ Hamler back, could be really valuable with this offense. Now, of course, they need a guy that has sure hands. That's what Tim Patrick brought. But Cortland Sutton has looked just unreal out there. You want to go back to what he was in 2019 when he was a Pro Bowler. He looks every bit like that, and even maybe more confident because his quarterback is a little bit better. So I'd say Montrell is certainly a guy that I have an eye on. I'd probably go – I'm trying to think here. You want 3, right? Is that what you said? I got lost with the pumpkin spice thing. So
don't we all?
Yeah. I'll tell you what. I'll say Damari Mathis. I'm really intrigued by Damari Mathis. Yeah. And he has been getting some time with the 1s. Even today when they went to dime, he was out there. So I'd say, again, I'm one of the biggest Michael Ojemudia guys out there. He's certainly on this roster. So is Mathis, in my opinion. But Mathis could be intriguing, especially if you do have another injury, say to Ronald Darby. Hopefully not ever past Sertan, that kind of thing. But if you have an injury, Damari Mathis as an outside corner is really intriguing, and I want to see more from him.
So I kind of want to go into the offensive and defensive line. Now, there was this big battle in training camp on whether the offensive line looks bad and the defense is just that good, or whether the offensive line can be fixed or what have you. And it looked like during that game, the offensive line had a really tough time getting the running going, but they also had a tough time stopping the run on the defensive side. Is that just because we don't have good enough depth behind the line, or is it something schematically that we can kind of fix?
It's a really good question. And at this point, you make a great observation on most of training camp when you're like, okay, is this the D line dominating or is the offensive line having some issues? And sometimes it can be a little bit of both, right? I mean, we could say multiple things can be true. When you see it out there, and the fact that they had dominated against Dallas during the scrimmage, and I mean, that was a lot of first team, right? But they dominated against Dallas in the scrimmage on Thursday, and then they get out to the game and they look like they're getting pushed around. It makes you wonder a little bit about the depth. Now, Natani Moody, who would have probably been out there with the second team, is not available. So I think that would have helped strengthen a little bit. I think you'll also see the drop-off maybe at offensive tackle, especially with Quinn Bailey. And then you're also wondering a little bit about Calvin Anderson. And I'll tell you right now, they've been cycling in a little Cam Fleming. Now, I don't know if that's the answer. I don't think that's the answer. I kind of hope it's not the answer. No offense. but again, I think that they want to, initially there was hey, Calvin Anderson's taking all the snaps at right tackle. Maybe they want to see what it looks like with some other guys, see, when they go back and look at the film and practices, does it look like we're better there, or does it look about the same? And then, again, when Billy Turner, who I don't expect to be ready for the beginning of the season, when he's inevitably ready, what other options could they possibly have there? I still think Calvin Anderson is their best option right now. But certainly, like I said, when you saw the second team all working together, and I'll throw one more thing in there. Remember, you'll never see, oh gosh, I say this knocking on wood. You'll hopefully never see the entire second team offensive line starting. Like you see spot starters, right? But they never all work together at the same time.
Ryan, have you heard any Randy Gradishar updates? Have you ever heard any updates for Randy Gradishar's candidacy today with the senior committee meeting?
I haven't. As we've been speaking, I've seen a few sort of things flash on my screen, so I haven't had a chance to look. But no, I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything. There's, again, it depends on who you're talking to, right? Some people are like, I got some cautious optimism, and then I got the other side saying, no way, like Broncos are always getting screwed out of these things, and I don't know. I don't really. There is, sometimes on these things I have a pretty good beat on what it is. When it was Steve, when it was Mr. B, like we had a pretty good beat on it. But I don't for Randy. So if somebody's got out there, then that's great. But I haven't seen anything yet.
Okay. So Ryan, I want to circle back a little bit on the wide receiver room and of course the pass rush room. With that wide receiver room, and being so competitive a little bit, it might possibly ponder the idea of maybe another Trinity Benson situation. Or even for the standpoint with the pass rush that we saw and the emergence of guys like Nick Benito and Baron Browning, it might force some decision making with say a guy like maybe a Malik Reed. Could we see a guy like a Malik Reed, or say maybe a wide receiver, maybe even just for the Trinity Benson trade that we saw last year, be on the move? I mean, could we see that? I mean, I know that there's been some talk that maybe George Payton wants to recoup picks, right? I mean, so could we see that possibly in the cards?
I absolutely think that's what he's considering. In fact, I know they are getting calls on some offensive linemen, so that's another one to keep in mind and throw in there. But yeah, right now, the way you have to kind of look at it for where the Broncos are at is they are kind of open for whatever, as long as they feel like their depth is in a pretty good shape. But again, you don't want to, knowing that you're in a window right now with Russell Wilson, you want to keep that in mind whatever deal you make. And if you're getting, and also again, I think George Payton's got a pretty good idea of value. So like, for example, Von Miller, he wasn't moving Von Miller unless they came at him with a king's ransom, right? A second and a third, which again, I was one to say on Broncos country, and I never thought they'd get that much. And even getting a sixth rounder, was a sixth rounder for Trinity Benson, I think.
Fifth and the seventh. Yeah, and they gave Benson in a sixth or something.
Right. That's what it was. Yeah, right. I mean, that's incredible, right? I mean, I mean, we all like Trinity Benson, but that's incredible. Yeah. Like, what are you supposed to do there? You got to make that deal. Kerry Vincent, they got a higher draft pick. They got a higher draft pick than what he was taken at. I mean, what are you supposed to do? You just go ahead and say yes, right? Unless you think that this guy's a core player. So it wouldn't surprise me if somebody came at them and said, "Hey, we'll give you a fifth rounder for one of these wide receivers that we really love," and say Jalen Virgil or something like that. I mean, get turned down a fifth rounder for a guy that was undrafted? Like, of course not. So I 100% think that they're in the mindset of that. But understand also, again, a lot of teams really value their players. And so it is sort of difficult to make these deals unless a team really comes at it and says, no, this is a player that we see as a lock for our 53-man roster. And again, we don't see a lot of those deals get done very often, but George Payton has always got his ear to the ground.
Speaking of getting deals done, I have been poking around trying to get some information on one Draymond Jones. He has just continued to be an absolute monster, but there is no information out there. No one's heard anything, to my knowledge. When do you think that pot gets stirred a little bit more and we get him signed?
He's one of those guys, along with, say, Bradley Chubb. I mean, just as you get into the season, they want to get Russell Wilson done as well. It's just kind of a mix of guys that they want to see how they perform this year. If Draymond Jones takes a pretty big step forward, I think that they really like him and they would like to get something done there. It also kind of depends on the health of DJ Jones and what he's doing. Of course, they play slightly different positions right there on the defensive line. What you expect from both of those guys. You need Draymond Jones to not only be good against the run, you need him to be able to rush the passer, where DJ Jones oftentimes what they're hoping to do is have him eat gaps. Same thing with Mike Purcell. So it's just a little bit different on the way they view that. But if Draymond Jones comes out like I think he's going to, he certainly will be in that conversation. Dalton Reiser is another name. If they don't deal him, is he a contract you're going to try to get locked up now? Or are you going to let him walk in free agency? So there's a few guys that they have decisions to make. I think the first one, of course, is Russ, and they want to get that done before the season wraps. And then it's what has Bradley Chubb done? How do we feel about the rest of our pass rush depth? And then I think Draymond's probably, and again, this is me speculating, but I think Draymond's a little bit lower on that, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't get it done first. It's just kind of whatever works out faster kind of deal.
Would you put Draymond lower on the priority list than Bradley Chubb?
No, I wouldn't actually. I'd put him higher, and only because of the investment you made in pass rush and in your edge depth. So I would actually put him higher. But I know they really like Bradley, and there's a organizational kind of view of Bradley because they took him 5th overall, even if it wasn't George Payton's pick. And they, like I said, they like his locker room presence. They like a lot about Bradley Chubb. So it's not one of those. Again, sometimes these deals get done not necessarily in the order you started negotiating them. So you have to, it's like some people think, oh, well, priority is this, and this. It's like, well, Draymond actually might be the first one done before us, right? I mean, that could happen. It's just a matter of when agents and guys, everybody gets back to each other.
So first, before I get into my question, Jeffrey Bryan wants to know if there's any hunch on starters playing at all next game. Are we going to see starters at all?
Listen, I was a proponent of seeing them play a little bit, but listening to Nathaniel Hackett today, he does not sound like a guy that's in any kind of hurry to put starters out there. So, good. Yeah, well, and I don't know. I feel like there's some value, at least for the first team offense, to get out there and especially the offensive line to do a little bit of hitting. And for the run game, I mean, Javonte Williams has not been tackled to the ground yet. So there's some value in that. I think there's some value.
Or ever.
Yeah, right. Maybe he plays the whole season, never gets tackled. We'll see. He just keeps running like Forrest. Yeah. So, I think there's value in it, but I also, again, it's one of those, like, you don't have to twist my arm to point out what can happen. You just saw Jonas Griffith, right? It's a perfect example, right? So you don't have to twist my arm on that. But listening to Nathaniel Hackett today, it doesn't sound like he's really pressed to do that. And there's this mindset, Sean McVay doesn't play a single starter during preseason. There's a mindset from some of these new coaches where they don't really see the value in doing that. They don't want to push it and they don't want to risk anything because we know how significant it can shift the entire view of your season if somebody goes down. I mean, you lose your quarterback, anybody loses their quarterback, and we're just talking about a completely different. You're talking about next season almost immediately. So I understand the rationale if they decide not to.
So I kind of want to go back to an oldie but a goodie. We're going to talk about some quarterbacks. The only difference is that we're actually talking about the backup quarterback, not the backup that's starting for the Broncos. So there's been this big thing between Josh Johnson and Brett Rippon. Me personally, I think that Johnson showed more last game, but Rippon had less to work with. So are we going to see Rippon start this second game? Is there a quarterback that's got the leg up on the backup competition right now? What are we looking at?
It's a good question. I'd say it wouldn't surprise me. I don't think he named it today, but it wouldn't surprise me if Rippon got the start this next time. If they decide not to start Russ, right? It wouldn't surprise me if Rippon got those opportunities. They really do want it to be a competition for the backup position. They are not giving it to Josh Johnson, but on the other side, it's hard to ignore the experience, right? I mean, if just nothing else, like whether it's a bit of a punchline, his experience or not, it's legit, right? I mean, it is something that if your starter goes down, you want a guy that has experience. And Brett Rippon has the one game against the Jets. And Brett Rippon is going to be a very good coach in this league, inevitably. Like, I think one way or the other, whether it's NFL or he starts out in college, he's going to be one of those, just super sharp guy. Starts out as a quarterback's coach, eventually works into an OC role. It wouldn't shock me at all if he ends up one day being a head coach. But right now, if you're looking at, okay, if Russell Wilson went down, who would I trust? That's the question the coaching staff has to ask. And I think that is probably Josh Johnson if you're asking me today.
Ryan, what's your favorite behind-the-scenes moment of this training camp that you're able to share?
Able to share.
Oh, yeah. Man. Wow. Yeah, I'd have to think about that for a minute. Again, be able to share is the important.
So nothing with Mario.
Oh, no, nothing with Mario. That's a good question. I mean, we have a lot of like side conversations, not only media, but sometimes with the players. Okay, I'll give you one. I can use some language on this. Yeah, so
we've all heard it before. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's not even that bad. I can actually probably say it on the radio, but I have this like thing when I go into radio mode that I just don't use language ever, and then as soon as the mics go off, we're all sailors, right?
Yep.
But yeah, so
no.
So a player after the Dallas scrimmage, I talked to a couple of guys, and before I even turn on the mic, they were basically like, we beat their ass. Like they were like before I even said anything, like, hey, how was practice? How's it been going? They were like, we beat their ass. Like, and you heard it on the Broncos like video they put out.
Right.
But they like to a man, like every single, like I talked to an offensive defensive guys, and like I couldn't even get the microphone on fast enough, which is probably good because I probably couldn't have used it. But other expletives were shared. But that was like before I could even say anything. An offensive player and a defensive player. Like, I'm like, man, that was fun out there. They're like, we beat their ass. I'm like, okay. I was like, all right, man. Just reminded the Sun Radio. It's not serious. It's not Sirius XM. Let's just keep it. Let's keep it a family hour. Just keep family hour. So
there was this whole big thing on Twitter. People like, I want to know who said we beat their ass. Who was that?
Well, I mean, I know the guys that I talked to that said it, but yeah, I mean, they were just, and it was cool too because they've been and these guys hear it, right? I mean, I talked to a couple other guys, like they heard the Coach Hackett isn't doing enough to toughen them up, right? These practices are too easy, and they heard all that noise, right? And they really wanted to show everybody, including the Dallas Cowboys, that is just a complete joke as far as a storyline, a narrative about this team. It was personal to them. And you'd think it'd be the other way around, right? The Dallas Cowboys, who got punked on their field last year, would have come into Denver and looked to exact some kind of revenge to really get back at the Broncos. But it was, again, the other way around. The Broncos defense was instigating 7 fights over on one field. And on the offensive side, the Broncos couldn't stop scoring touchdowns in the red zone. The only thing that was a bit of a negative is Calvin Anderson versus Micah Parsons. But again, can you really blame Calvin Anderson? Because Micah Parsons is really freaking good. But yeah, that was, the guys have all heard it, and privately had a few conversations with players that, they almost, again, guys use all sorts of things for chip on their shoulder. Right. And so this was just one more chip on their shoulder. Okay. All right. Y'all think we're not doing enough out here to get ready for the season. Okay. All right. We'll show you. And I've been on the other side of that. I've watched, Vic Fangio practices where he just ground those guys into the ground, and they left mentally, physically exhausted. And before the season even started, they were just they were done. And I've watched that happen. And then so this other way sounds like super cuddly and fuzzy, where everybody gets these walkthroughs every 3 days. The guys are getting a lot out of it. And like I said, I think they wanted to show it.
Yeah. So I want to ask. Obviously, it was a really tough day. It was cut day for some players. I mentioned about Travis Fulgham earlier, and we talked a little bit about Jamar Johnson at the top of it. And Jamar Johnson probably was the surprise of the very early round of cuts. Who are maybe, in your estimation, Ryan, like maybe some of the players that are on that roster bubble? Or maybe put themselves in the category of maybe a surprise cut candidate?
It's a good question. I mean, surprise cut's always it's a touchy thing, right? Because you almost intentionally try to find names that, and I'm not saying it's a bad question. I'm just saying it's like you're trying to intentionally find names of guys that you're like, oh, okay, well, this guy could be a bit of a surprise cut. I guess if I was going to throw one out there, I think he's on. But if I was going to throw one out there, maybe like an Isang Bassi. And that's where they feel like K'Wan Williams, Damari Mathis. They might think like Bless Austin. Now, again, Isang's been the guy playing in nickel since K'Wan went down. But he's also been the guy that's been burned a lot out there, especially by Jerry Jeudy. Now, Jerry Judy's a tough cover for everybody. By the way, it was a great moment yesterday with Pat Surtain covering Jerry Jeudy in the slot. Oh man! So Jerry Jeudy was beating everybody. I mean, he's beating everybody. And then Pat Surtain was on him for the final play of practice, and PBU, man, not even a worry. It was just Pat Surtain, and it's his world, and we're all just hanging out in it. But anyways, back to your question. I think that this team came into training camp with a pretty set roster, at least at the starters. We kind of knew, okay, well, these are the guys, the DBs, right? The nickel starting, right? Even when you get to dime and include Caden Stearns in that conversation, we knew who the starting inside linebackers were likely going to be, the starting defense. So there was only like a little bit on the offensive line, but we knew kind of who's making it. So I don't know. I don't know if we're at a point where there's really a lot of surprises. Even Travis Fulgham, who I was singing the praises of in the offseason, was just dominating during OTAs. I thought he could continue to do that during training camp, but he didn't. And other guys stepped up, and they sort of forced the issue in that receiving room. So right now, nobody today was so much a surprise, maybe a little earlier than expected, but all those guys that they moved on from today were firmly in the roster bubble conversation. And if we got to the next cut down and they were gone, I don't think it would have changed, much.
Oh, one storyline that didn't get a ton of motion was the Nathaniel Hackett versus Dan Quinn. I feel like that was probably decently big for Nathaniel Hackett, as much as he wouldn't want to admit it. Do you feel like that was probably a big thing for him to be able to go out there and just completely dominate who would have been the front runner for the Denver Broncos head coaching position?
I mean, it could have been a little bit, right? I mean, I know for a fact last year when the Broncos played the Dallas Cowboys, Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur made it a mission to embarrass the Dallas Cowboys, because they heard all the rumors about the coordinators there in Dallas, and they basically said, we're going to go out and show these guys that they're not very good. And it was like the game that they were like, we're going to be really good. I don't know if we're going to be good the rest of the year, but this is the game we're going to be really good at. But yeah, I mean, Genius. It could be a little bit of that. Could be a little bit of that. I'd say for Nathaniel Hackett, though, I think he's got loftier goals in mind. And I think that he also knows that he needs his team to be playing well almost right away. So I think more than anything, he wanted to show a core competency. You saw how he made some slight adjustments. He started to call the offense a little bit different after they got to that slow start, started to mix it up a little bit. I think he really wanted to put on a show a little bit out there in front of the home fans. I think they wanted to show that. And, my favorite part really of the preseason game was the 2-minute drill, the 1-minute drive before half. The way he executed the way they executed that, Montreal Washington, running the ball over to the ref. I mean, all of it, like for all the questions we had about Vic Fangio managing things, Nathaniel Hackett in one preseason game answered probably a dozen of those questions for a lot of fans. So for me, if you came into that game going, I wonder how this is going to look, you saw a shell of what they're going to be because it's all 2s and 3s, and yet they look just as prepared as any kind of starting team out there. They look like they were ready to go.
As Ben had tweeted earlier, I believe he's something about that you could tell Hackett plays Madden based on his clock management skills. And I feel like that's probably pretty accurate. You do learn a lot about clock management in Madden. If nothing else you learn in that game, clock management is something that you learn.
Oh, for sure. Right. And I mean, again, anybody that's played Madden gets it. And I think sometimes there's this scoffing nature of people that's like, oh, well, Madden compared to the real game. It's, but it's like, well, listen, man, a lot of those guys play Madden, and there's a little bit of the, video game nature of fantasy football and the way the offense has gotten all the breaks now in the NFL, and how they continue to basically tell defensive players, like, don't even breathe on the quarterback and be careful to even breathe on the wide receivers. And so, I mean, it's in a lot of ways you start to think about it in terms of that. And Nathaniel Hackett is a guy that is of that generation that plays Madden and pays attention to that stuff.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, I know that you're a busy guy, and I do not want to monopolize too much of your time. I know you've got kind of a day off, I guess. So I want to thank you for joining us. All of your social media tags, iHeartRadio, KOA, all your descriptions tags are all down below in our description on the show. So I want to thank you again for joining us. It's always great when you join us. So I'm glad you're able to.
Appreciate it, fellas. Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
You have yourself a good rest of the night.
All right, you too. Thanks, guys.
See ya.